Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Shogun. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm actually really excited about this episode. I've kind of had this percolating in my mind for years, or at least a long time. We're going to talk about intelligence, and in this case, intelligence refers to in the sense of the intelligence agencies like the CIA and the process and technique of intelligence, which is called Tradecraft, and specifically intelligence analysis and something called the intelligence cycle. So this is an epistemology episode. Epistemology is about how we know what we know. And I think the best way I know to do epistemology is to do intelligence and specifically intelligence analysis. So I want to kind of break that down. But before we get started, please join the Roundtable Discord server. We record this podcast every day, usually at about 9 or 9:30 p.m. Central. You can see all our upcoming special events. And again, we do them every day on the announcements channel. And if you go to #RT Podcast, you're going to find our 5 different content channels being BitChute, YouTube Video, YouTube Old School, YouTube New School, and SoundCloud. We got 5 different channels, all with their own episodes. Please like, follow, and subscribe to all of them. We passed 30,000 external views on the podcast today. So in addition to all the live audiences, we've had over 30,000 people listen to the podcast externally. So that's a great thing to celebrate as well. And today we're going to kick off this podcast. So this came up earlier in the context of the general chat. You know, I often post all kinds of sources from any source at all, anything from the Daily Mail or some, tabloid or conspiracy theory source, all the way up to, medical journals or scientific journals or academic articles that are peer reviewed, right? And I'll post sources from many different levels of publication or levels of research or levels of credibility. And something that's interesting that happens is a lot of time people say, well, don't you know that that's a bad source, right? If I post a Fox News article, people go, oh my God, you believe in Fox News? Or if I post a Wikipedia article, people go, oh my God, this is a Wikipedia article, right? That doesn't mean anything. Or they'll say, Daily Mail, don't you know that's an untrustworthy source, right? And that's a legitimate thing to say from a certain level of understanding. But I want to kind of break down how I look at sources and epistemology only as an entrance into a much bigger topic. But, okay, so how's the best way to begin this? So throughout this episode, I'm going to be using a lot of, I'm going to be posting things for you to look at as well. So please try to look at general chat, and I'm going to be posting sources there for you to look at as we go along. And I'm just going to move Mr. Sign down here. And again, if someone can keep an eye on the record keeping as we go, that'd be great. Okay, so basically, I guess the point to start with is this image. I personally think this image is the most profound and useful and powerful thing I've ever seen in terms of a single image. So this is going to be the launching point. Okay, this is the relationship of data, information, and intelligence, and the source is the Joint Intelligence publication of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So when you're doing intelligence analysis, whether you work for the CIA or some other private or public government or corporate intelligence operation, you're always going to be doing this same process. So it's very simple to look at, and yet incredibly profound in its implications. So what you have here is a tapering triangular shape moving from left to right. It's broad on the left, and it's narrow even to the point of a spear or the point of a needle on the right. So on the left, you have everything, and on the right, you have a very specific, concentrated, and focused thing. And in between the broad end on the left and the narrow end on the right, you have a series of 3 lenses. Each of those lenses could be represented as filters, right? So think of a fishing net, right? Let's say you only wanted to catch shrimp. And let's say shrimp are just the most delicious, tasty, and valuable thing in the ocean, right? Now, in order to catch these delicious, tiny little shrimp, you're going to have to cast a pretty big net, and you're going to have to catch all the fish that you can out of the ocean. But by applying a series of increasingly narrow filters, you're going to end up with a pile of shrimp, even though you're going to catch all kinds of eels and sea snakes and crabs and other things that you may or may not want. Or maybe you'll want them at one point, and then you'll eventually throw them away when you no longer need them. But ultimately, you're going to end up some really nice little shrimp on the right. And those shrimp are called intelligence. Now, intelligence is a word that has, like most words in the English language, many meanings. So intelligence could mean you're very smart, right? You'd say Albert Einstein is very intelligent. That's not exactly what we mean here. So what do we mean by intelligence here? Well, let's find an exact definition, which is good to work with. So, intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills, but in this case, the collection of information of military or political value. And so in order to attain knowledge and skills, yes, but more specifically to collect information of military or political value, we employ the intelligence process. And that's, again, that first image, which is showing the relationship of data, information, intelligence. We're going to get into that a bit more. I'm going to post another image here. This is another image that represents the intelligence process. Now, this is really interesting because you'll notice there's no beginning or end on this image. It doesn't say where to start. It's just a cycle. And it doesn't tell you where to start or where to end because it never starts or ends. So you have intelligence and feedback. And the first part is evaluation on the top. And the second part is feedback, evaluation and feedback. So planning and direction, collection, processing and exploitation, analysis and production, dissemination, and integration. Intelligence analysis is a way of reducing the ambiguity of highly ambiguous situations. Now, this is why intelligence is the master discipline. This is why it's the most important thing that you could ever learn, because we do not, as human beings, operate in a non-ambiguous environment. So some people have the privilege of working in things like formal logic, formal mathematics, computer science, mathematics, chemistry. And in these worlds, truth is distinct and it's clear and it's straightforward and it's non-negotiable and it's obvious and it's right? You mix this and this chemical together, this happens, 1 + 1 is 2. A triangle has 3 sides, and in order to code this program, it's, whatever, X code equals Y result. Human beings don't live in a world like that, right? We live in a world where people lie, where people keep secrets, where people employ ingenious and multi-layered strategies of deception and misdirection, where people manipulate information and use the truth to create misleading falsehoods, who conceal information, manufacture data, etc. And yet we still need to arrive at something that approximates the truth in a world where not only do we not have straightforward facts, but incredibly intelligent people are working very hard to confuse us, lie to us, and use any possible method to misdirect us. So only intelligence offers a solution to this. So we all live in a highly ambiguous environment where even if people give you information, they may actually be giving you information in order to mislead you. So are you going to be able to figure out with pure logic? No. Mathematics? No. Can you read anything and trust it? No. Is there any source that you can trust absolutely? No. Is there anyone who won't or can't lie to you? No. Right? Is anything you know certain? Only one thing. The only thing you know for certain is that you exist and that you're having an experience. That is a 100% certain thing. After that, every further conjecture becomes a confidence interval that is less than 100%. So other than the fact that you exist and you're having an experience, everything you know is not a certainty, but only a confidence interval, which is always less than 100%. And you don't even know exactly what percent it is. And that percentage is always in flux. So as intelligence analysts, we don't figure out the truth. We figure out an approximated confidence interval that is always in flux. And our goal is to keep feeding new information into the analysis to hopefully increase the confidence interval of our conclusion, or rather our hypothesis, on any given situation. Right? So there is no certainty. As soon as you think you're certain about something, all you're really saying is you're no longer taking in new information and you're no longer doing further analysis. So certainty or confidence is the death of analysis, right? You should always be re-examining your assumptions over and over and over and never think you know anything. So there is so much to get into here. So I just want to structure this with a few notes, and please bear with my monologue. So the body of specific methods for intelligence analysis is generally referred to as analytic tradecraft. The academic disciplines examining the art and science of intelligence analysis are mostly referred to as intelligence studies. So intelligence analysis, analytic tradecraft. What does tradecraft mean? Well, the craft of the trade of intelligence. So tradecraft is the practical and applied skills of a spy, quote unquote. But the term spy is highly misleading because a spy implies someone who sneaks around and tries to like watch you do things. That's such a small part of what a quote unquote spy does. Spies, quote unquote, are intelligence agents. And intelligence is like applied research. And then, of course, you can't separate intelligence from counterintelligence because so intelligence is trying to figure out what people are doing even when they're lying to you. And counterintelligence is trying to confuse other people who are trying to figure out what you're doing. So the traditional intelligence cycle. The traditional intelligence cycle is the fundamental cycle of intelligence processing in a civilian or military intelligence agency or in law enforcement as a closed path consisting of repeating nodes. The stages of the intelligence cycle include the issuance of requirements by decision makers, in other words, the requests of the client, collection, processing, analysis, and publication of intelligence. The circuit is completed when decision makers provide feedback and revised requirements. The intelligence cycle is also called the intelligence process by the U.S. Department of Defense and the Uniformed Services. The intelligence cycle is an effective way of processing information and turning it into relevant and actionable intelligence. Actionable meaning something you can act on. So what's the next way to step here? So again, if we go back to the initial image of the process, which is right here, you'll see that the first part, planning and direction, means what you're looking for. Now, you could be your own planner and director, or the client could be the planner and director. So if I set myself my own research goal, then I'm the planner and the director, and I'm the one who's putting forward the requirements. If I'm being hired by someone else, then they'll provide it, right? So all that means is, what are you looking into? What is it you're trying to figure out? That's the planning direction. The actual intelligence analysis part comes with collection. So let me see if I can find that. Okay, so anyways, if you go back to the first one, right, that shows this series of filters. On the left, you have the operational environment. So the operational environment is essentially the entire planet, because no matter what your role as an intelligence agent, and again, to say this doesn't mean you have to be a spy, that's the whole point. Any human being should be an intelligence agent, right? Whether you're a professional spy or whether you're just a human being, you still have the problem, which is you're trying to figure out the truth in a world where people may be lying to you, they may be confused, they may be wrong, you may be under misdirection, but you still have to figure out the truth. Whether that's just like, is that person at work like talking behind my back and lying about it and then trying to get me fired? Or is my wife cheating on me and like blah, blah, blah? Or am I like going to be outcompeted by this businessman who says he's my friend? Or is this business contractor going to screw me over? Like, no matter who you are, you're going to have to deal with these same kind of problems. The only difference is intelligence agents have been trained and they formalized a system to do it effectively. Think of how useful it would be to apply that kind of skill set to your own life. So look at the operational environment, right? On the one sense, the operational environment in this server could just be the server itself. That would be like an understandable way to look at it. The round table is the operational environment, right? In a broader sense, it might be Discord itself, but let's just say, to make it easier to understand, the operational environment is the round table server. So that's the wide end on the left. Now, everything that happens here, everything that's said in voice, everything that's posted in general, everything that's posted in every single channel is part of that operational environment. All of that is information. It's not intelligence, it's information. At this point, it's noise, right? It's an ocean of noise. All the posts, all the images, blah, blah, blah. But you have two factors, noise and signal. And if you can reduce the static or the irrelevant signal, you end up with a meaningful signal. So in other words, to separate signal from noise is the same as to separate intelligence from the operational environment. In other words, it is to remove everything that is irrelevant, and what you're left with is relevant. Relevant information is intelligence, right? So the goal is, how do you turn a sea of potentially irrelevant information into the shrimp or the gold, right? It's like gold, sifting for gold. A lot of it's sand, but if you shake all the sand out through a series of small screens, you end up with gold nuggets, right? So think of it that way. So most of what's being said in any given operational environment may be meaningless, but you begin by collecting it, right? So you have to start collecting your data from the operational environment. And let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, anyways, and once you have collected your information in whatever source that is, you end up with data. So your collected information is data. Then processing exploitation, there's many different ways you can process it and many different ways you can exploit it, exploiting it being, using it. Now, this is just kind of an interesting little important concept here. It shows these series of little fish. These are the 4 F's: fact, finding, forecast, and fortune. The purpose of intelligence analysis is to reveal to a specific decision maker the underlying significance of selected target information. Analysts should begin with confirmed facts. So confirmed facts are the strongest basis. So that's why they're like the bottom of the food chain there. You apply expert knowledge to those facts and produce plausible but less certain findings. So the facts are certain, but in and of themselves, they don't mean much. Once you interpret the facts, you end up with findings, right? So if I'm a researcher, I'll go gather a bunch of facts, but that's not of any use to the person I present it to. They want my findings. They want my conclusions. So you start with the facts give rise to the conclusions, which are the findings. The forecast, well, that's saying, okay, well, my facts show that every year is getting hotter. Therefore, my finding is that climate change has occurred. Global warming is happening. That's my finding. And my forecast, it's going to get even hotter, and we're going to have more forest fires and more droughts. That would be a forecast, right? So each one is progressively less certain, which ties back to what Hermes was saying about the slippery slope fallacy. Each additional step is less certain, but that's the nature of intelligence. We have to make predictions and projections. If we don't do that, even though each additional prediction and projection is less certain, if we don't make them, we're not of any use, because our job is not only to describe what's happened or is happening, but what is going to happen. Because only by making predictions about a future, which is always going to be less than 100%, you say, well, they might attack on the eastern flank. Well, then we got to fortify the eastern flank, even though the chance of that happening is less than 100%. So that's sort of the series there. So here's the interesting thing. In intelligence analysis, the analyst rarely has direct access to the observable subject, but gathers information indirectly. Even when the intelligent subject at hand is a technical one, analysts must remain aware that the other side may be presenting deliberately deceptive information. So when you do science, it's a totally different game, right? You do an experiment, you look at the result, it's all black and white. But in this, there is no science because everybody's lying to you. Everybody's tricking you. Everybody's deceiving you, misleading you at every step. So it requires a completely different epistemological method. So this is kind of interesting. So what you're going to want to do is start collating. So collating, I want you guys to think about that famous scene from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and you also see it in other cases where Charlie Day has all the cuttings from newspapers and stuff, and he's got them all pinned up on the wall, and you're connecting the wall with little strings and stuff, and so I'm posting the image now, but you're posting little strings and stuff, and you're connecting it, right? And that's exactly what we do. We read between the lines, we connect the dots, we collate our sources, and we try to discern patterns. There it is, exactly. Thank you. Exactly what I was looking for. So that's that thing he has on the wall. That's sort of intelligence analysis. So this ties back to the origin of this whole thing where, Hermes was saying, oh, that's the Daily Mail. That's like a bad source, right? But I was saying there is no bad source. And what I mean by that is look at Charlie there. All that shit he has on his wall, none of those are bad sources, because although each of them on its own may be biased, may be incomplete, may be inaccurate, may be an outright falsification, the point is not what the article says, it's the patterns and connections that he is drawing between them. So some of those may be useful precisely because they're lies. Others may be useful precisely because they're the rantings of crazy people. Others may be useful precisely because they're ideological or propaganda documents. Others may be useful because they're the truth as the author knew them. Our job is not to identify that source which we most trust. Our job is to trust no source, consume all information, and submit all information to a systematic process of analytical filters, which render the ocean of noise into a gold nugget of signal. So to turn something down on the basis that it's a bad, quote unquote, bad source is wrong-headed in this case, because you're not taking it as truth anyway, no matter how good the source is. So let's say somebody gave you a communist Chinese publication. You'd say, well, this is coming from the bias of these are communist propagandists, government propaganda. So it's not what I would call the truth, but it's telling me the truth about many things. It's telling me the truth about what communist ideology is, telling me the truth about what their propaganda goal is, or what their ideological or rhetorical approach is. So it doesn't need to be trying to tell me the truth in good faith in order for me to learn the truth from the analysis of it. It's because all of it's part of the operational environment, and all of it goes through the same problem of pattern of systematic interpretation. And you may wish to do things like create flowcharts. This is similar to what Charlie's doing here. Outlining, possibly in a word processing program, or using visualization tools such as mind maps can give structure, as can file folders and index cards. Databases with statistical techniques such as correlation factor analysis and time series analysis can give insight. So once you gain all this information, you may want to start collating it. You may want to start organizing it. And you may want to start creating maps and grids and graphs, because it's all about accessing your higher intelligence, right? Your brain is a supercomputer, and we may not understand the neurology of how it works, but it works very, very well, and no computer can match it currently. So it says some analysts speak of a Zen-like state in which they allow the data to speak to them. Others may meditate or even seek insight in dreams, hoping for an insight such as that given to Auguste Kukul in a daydream that resolved one of the fundamental structural problems of organic chemistry. So look at Charlie there. He's going crazy. He's written all this stuff on the wall. He's connecting it all. He's going nuts. If he goes to bed tonight and his brain pieces all that shit together in the right way, he's going to wake up with an insight that the strongest supercomputer on Earth currently could not provide. And that ultimately is what we do, is we drink in all the information. We don't rule any of it out as invalid or not good. We take it all in and we consider its source, and we consider the connections between the sources, whether they confirm or disconfirm each other, what their agenda is, what their motivation is, what the way they speak tells us about the person speaking and what they're trying to do, right? So this is one of the principles, which is quite interesting. Be bold and honest. Bold means don't be afraid to make dramatic predictions, even if you can't prove them yet. Be honest, don't lie, right? So tell the truth, but don't be afraid to make, bold leaps. And, you have to be willing to be wrong, because that's the risk you're being paid to take, right? If you're playing it safe, you're not providing any interesting or useful information. So it says, well, a good analyst must be able to consider thoughtfully alternative viewpoints, and analysts must be willing to stand by his or her position. So I'm just going to say a few more things, and then we'll be done. The purpose of intelligence analysis is to reveal to a specific decision maker, who in most cases will be yourself, the underlying significance of selected target information. Analysts should begin with confirmed facts, apply certain knowledge to produce plausible but less certain findings, and even forecast when the forecast is appropriately qualified. Yeah, here we go. Please, thank you for bearing with me. Collation describes the process of organizing raw data, interpolating known data, evaluating the value of data, and putting in working hypotheses. The simplest approaches often are an excellent start. With due regard for protecting documents and information, a great deal can be done with pieces of paper, a whiteboard, a table, and perhaps a corkboard, which again, this is literally all we're talking about here, right? This is why I think it's so funny. Like, I call myself a conspiracy theorist, but conspiracy theory and intelligence analysis is exactly the same thing. So what makes something a conspiracy theory is you're trying to understand and make theories about people who are lying and things that are being kept secret. That's what we call a conspiracy theory. That's the same exact thing as intelligence analysis, right? So an intelligence analyst and a conspiracy theorist are the same exact thing, which is why I'm trying to teach a bunch of conspiracy theorists to apply intelligence analysis, because it's going to make you a better conspiracy theorist, or vice versa, a better intelligence analysis. So we're almost done here. So one form of intelligence is warning intelligence, right? So if you have the guys going, look, doom is coming, the end of the world is coming, that's warning intelligence. Military and political analysts are always watching for predefined indication that an emergency, such as an outbreak or war, or a political coup is imminent. When an indicator is approved, policymakers are alerted and a crisis team is convened with the mission providing time-sensitive intelligence on the situation to all relevant customers. So here on the server, we keep an eye on things and we try and warn you about things that may happen based on what we see happening. So these, I'm just kind of throwing these out. Action always breaks down to three things: the decision to act, the action, and disengagement from the action. So even action is itself a three-part step. These are just now kind of out of sequence keys that I wanted to remember. Employing rules for evaluating information and making judgments helps analysts manage the deluge of information, discern trends, and identify attempts at deception. So again, this is kind of just a description of what we do here. And when I say we, I mean all of us should do. Intelligence analysts are expected to give policymakers opinions, both support and reality checks. The most effective products have several common features: opportunities and dangers for interests of the analyst country or organization, especially unexpected developments that require reaction. You want to be able to discern and analyze the motives, objectives, strengths, and vulnerabilities of adversaries, allies, and other actors, and direct and indirect sources of friendly parties' leverage on foreign players and issues. So this is about knowing the strengths and weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and assets of your allies and your enemies, and how they might come in handy for you or for them. And the tactical alternatives for advancing stated national policy goals. So if you have a goal for your organization, you want to be able to provide different ways to achieve that same goal. That's the value added that you're providing. So the point of all of this was more than just figuring out how to assess what are good or bad sources. But the point of this is kind of like, if you look at it this way, there are no bad sources. It all comes down to the skill at which you're applying these various filters, right? So if you have your filters right here, then all sources are good, because you're putting them all through all the sources, like resources, like raw units of information. There are no good or bad ones, because what's good or bad of them only comes out when you shove them from the left all the way to the right. And so the big mess of noise, including Daily Mail, InfoWars, Alex Jones, whatever source you think is crap, it's still part of that fat end on the left. And once you cram it through those filters, if those filters are good and you're doing that well, you're still going to get more nuggets of gold. So if you say, okay, well, this source is very bad, it only has a 10% quote unquote truth rating, and this source is very good, it has a 60% truth rating, you're still going to end up with more gold, right? If you take all that sand and shove it all through the same filter, right? You're going to prioritize your best, most nugget rich parts to get the most gold, but you're going to want to filter all that sand to find all those little gold nuggets. And as long as your analysis is on point, there is no bad information. So I'm about ready to finish my rant here, but you'd say, what's better, to be told the truth or to be lied to? Most people would say it's better to be told the truth, because if you're lied to, you're deceived. But if you're intelligent enough to know when someone is lying to you, it's actually better to be lied to than to be told the truth. Because when someone's lying to you, they believe that they have an advantage over you that they don't actually have, because you've already realized that they're lying to you, and therefore everything that they say is actually revealing to you more information than what they intended to. You're now figuring out, why are they lying to me? How are they lying? What is their agenda in lying? What do they think about me that makes them think this lie is going to be compelling? So for as long as you can maintain the illusion that you're falling for their bullshit, they're actually giving you more information than if they were telling you the truth. And in the same regard, what's better information? Crazy person's information or sane person? Well, actually, crazy person's information is giving you information about how a disordered mind works, what mental illness is, and how a mentally ill mind works, which might actually be exactly the information you want, right? If you want to understand mental illness, crazy people give you better information than sane people. What if you want to understand, how the right wing in America thinks? You could say Fox News is a bad source of information because it's biased. Or you could say that whenever you watch Fox News, you're literally learning through reverse engineering how the average American thinks, because that media is packaged and targeted to that audience. So if you're smart enough to interpret it, everything they say, no matter how quote unquote stupid, is actually the product of a highly sophisticated system of communication that's telling you about that organization, their agenda, and their target audience, and what's effective against that target audience. And the same if you watch the left or the right. So the fact that a certain bias has a left or a right bias doesn't matter, because they're teaching you about how that bias works, what their rhetoric is, what their narrative is. What does that tell you about that group and what they think about you? Because they're telling you what they think is going to convince you. That tells you what they think about you, right? So it's not as simple as good source, bad source, true source, false source, left source, right source. There's no good or bad sources, only good or bad analysis. And on that point, I think I'll close my monologue, but thank you for bearing with me. Does anyone have any comments or questions?
Yeah,
Does anyone have a comment or question? Go ahead.
Yeah, like, so the idea of putting it through a lens, absolutely, for sure, get as much information as possible. But if we don't take into factor the reality of practicality, of energy, limited time, and of course, yeah, the fact that we don't have a limited energy, it means that we need to focus in certain areas. Like, for example, perhaps there may be more gold if we could, like, get if we could filter gold from the ocean, like part per million, maybe there's like 1 part per million gold or something. And the idea of like sieving through the entire ocean to get some sounds, cool, but not possible, at least not for an individual. So like the whole analysis aspect is already done by those places that calculates the, how do I put it, the probability of these websites being correct. I'm not even considering bias at the moment, but like, if you're interested in the truth and you have a limited amount of energy, it makes more sense to focus on areas that has a higher propensity for truth and requires less, how do I put it, less effort when it comes to getting to the truth, because the amount of hoops you have to jump over for bad sources. They don't even provide sources, by the way. It's bad websites. It's there was a law, I forgot what it was, like Randolini or whatever. It's just not really a big a deal. Who cares if it's a law or not? It's just a statement which says that it is far more difficult to debunk bullshit than it is to create it. Something like that. There's a disproportional energy required in one direction. And therefore, it's like, if someone has infinite time, infinite energy, sure, that's great. But when it comes to like all fact checking and stuff, I think it does make sense to rely on, institutions and whatever, because they at least provide their sources, right? Even when it comes to fact checking. So like, if you want to do specifically on a news article, you can do fact check on it, go to multiple websites that do fact checking professionally and give you sources, give you the rationale, give you the contradictions, give you the history, all that. And that's part of the processing, that's part of the analysis. And the same way that the operational environment is like becoming less and less and less and less because you're throwing away stuff you don't need. That's what I'm doing too. I'm throwing away what I don't need. I looked at it, I observed it, I know what it is, I know what bias it has, I know the how do I put it, the accuracy of its truth on average. And I realized that I'm aware of it, but I'm not gonna go through it, as it is most likely useless.
Right. So again, if you look at the beginning of the cycle, it's going to depend on it's going to depend on planning and direction. In other words, the client. Who is the client? What does the client want? Now, in most of our cases, we are the clients, right? I'm the client or you're the client. When I do my research, I'm usually, but not always, doing it for my own personal reasons, which means I'm the client. So I define my own goal, right? So that's totally legitimate, right? The thing is, you have a different goal than me, because you might just be trying to figure out, a particular fact of nature, like, does this certain medicine work or does it not work, right? And so in that regard, of course, what you're going to want to do is choose the most credible source that's going to give you the information you can trust. So if you want to find out, does vitamin C cure cancer? Are you going to look to the World Health Organization? Are you going to look to Alex Jones? Or are you going to look to poopooppeepants.com? right? Well, you're probably going to look for whichever of those three sources is the most dense and accurate source of truth, and you're going to just ignore all the noise, because considering that noise would have no relevance to the specific thing you're trying to figure out. But what I'm trying to point out is not only that if you take a broader net, you're going to catch more fish, right? Yeah, if you can scan even those like bad areas of information, because even a stop clock is right twice a day, you're still going to get a few gold nuggets. So if you have the resources, you should cast your net that wide and take in even those lesser quality sources of information, but you're going to want to prioritize the rich ones. But I'm saying something a little bit more than that. What I'm saying is actually the worst sources can be the best sources, depending on what you're trying to figure out. So as you know, I'm a sociologist by training. So what I'm studying is actually society, culture, ideas, ideologies, beliefs. So in other words, how people think and what they think about and why they think the way they think and what they think about things is never bad information to me, right? So if you say, oh, well, that's a highly right-wing source, therefore it's a bad source. No, that's a great source if I want to learn about right-wing people and how they think and what they care about and what agenda issues are important to them and what they like and don't like. Right. And the same way, a highly left-wing source is useful for the same regard. If I want to understand the left, and if I want to understand conspiracy theorists, I'm going to look at conspiracy theory content. And if I want to understand crazy people, I'm going to look at crazy person content. So to a quote-unquote normal person, a crazy person's opinion is worth less, or a biased person is worth less, or propaganda is worth less if you're just looking for quote-unquote the truth. But I'm learning the truth about lies. I'm learning the truth about politics, about agendas, about ideology. So whenever you get a source, you put that source on your Charlie wall on the wall, and then you draw a line to the source and you write Fox News, or you write CNN, or you write InfoWars. Then you understand that, yes, this is the information they gave me, and that information may have a truth value of only like 1 out of 10. It might be very low, but I can learn very high level truth by analyzing what you lied to me about, or even what stupid thing you said that wasn't true. That is not actually bad information as long as I characterize it correctly, not as information about what you're telling me intentionally, but what you're unintentionally telling me about yourself by telling me that thing. So if you come to me and say, hey, Shogun, I got some great fact for you, and then you say some stupid, useless thing, I might still learn something very useful about you by the stupid, useless thing that you tried to tell me. Right? And even if you came to me and lied to me and told me something completely false, I might learn something completely true by understanding what lie you tried to tell me and why you tried to tell me that lie.
Like, what if it's, and of course I'll drop it after this, but what if it's like the same lie over and over again, and you've heard it a million times, and it's just a different flavor every time? Does it still make sense to invest energy on it? Was like that?
So again, if your goal is to understand society itself, then you're always going to want to keep an eye on messaging. And you're not going to want to get offended or triggered or annoyed by messaging that doesn't match what you want to hear, what you like, what you agree with, or what you consider truthful. It signals intelligence, right? So you have different kinds of intelligence. You have signals intelligence, you have human intelligence. And generally speaking, through Discord, we get both human intelligence and signals intelligence, because the human intelligence is what the people are telling you. The signals intelligence is the technological artifacts created by the transmission and recording of that signal. So you use signals intelligence to get human intelligence and vice versa. But the point is, you know, if the right is only saying chirp, 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 abortion bad, abortion bad, abortion bad, gay bad, gay bad, gay bad, I may not be getting any quote unquote new information, but I'm at least keeping a location on their trajectory. It's like, imagine if you have a boat in the ocean and it just keeps going ding, ding, ding. It's the same exact ding. You're not getting any quote unquote new information, but each time it dings, it's telling you that its position remains the same. And that allows you to put a little dot on the wall and say, oh, that's what that thing is, right? So if the Catholics keep saying X, 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 at least I know that currently the Catholics are saying X, 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 X. And if the left is saying Y, I know that they're still saying Y. So again, my goal is not to preference one source over another, one ideology another, one religion over another. My goal is to understand what all of you are thinking at all times, and how what you think about each other affects everybody else, so that I can say, well, he's saying X, 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 and you're saying Y, and you're saying Z, Z, Z. And I know that you think X about Y, and you think Z about Y. So maybe if I make you think Z about X, that'll make him think X about Y. That's the kind of thinking that we have to be able to do, which means we can't be casting out any information because we don't like it, or because it's not what we want to hear, or because it doesn't match our paradigm, or because we think its information methods are shoddy, right? All of this is part of the operational environment. None of it should be, we shouldn't react angrily to any of it. We shouldn't ignore any of it. We shouldn't dismiss any of it. We shouldn't see any of it as useless, because if it's useless, it's because of your failure of analysis. If someone gives you information and you can't find any use for it, the failing is on your end. It's not in the information.
I'll add one final point to that then, to that last part, because so like imagine, there are computers all around, people have personal computers, and someone is disseminating malicious code, right? A virus of some kind. And then someone says it's your fault for not, having an antivirus and not being able to pick up on it. Yeah, you could say there's a partial responsibility there, but at the same time, as I said, there are practicalities that must be taken into consideration. Most people don't have time to do any of these analysis. That's just a fact. And from a sociological analysis, we can actually look at the effects of, let's say polarizing media or disinformation, over an extended period of time, for example. Nothing to do with you, by the way. This is just a random example. Like, for example, I don't know, anti-vax or whatever, right, being spread on YouTube by specific YouTube channels or something of that nature. If the effects of it are causing people to lead to harm, self-harm, harm to others or whatever, and if we realize that, practically and realistically, most people cannot, sift through all that information on their own, then do you not think it could be potentially irresponsible to do so? And before I let go, it's like without the analysis, without the antivirus, the information could be more harmful than good. Without that, as you said, ability, right? And if that is not provided for everyone, if it's not digested for everyone, if it's not, as I said, digested for everyone, it would, how do I put it? I'm repeating myself at this point. Yeah, but without it being digested, it could be useless at neutral, and very harmful at worst. At worst. So there we go.
Well, that's exactly right. So this whole podcast has only been about one thing. It's been about how you, as an analyst or a researcher, should process information in your operational environment, subjected to a series of filters and lenses to turn operational environment information into data and data into intelligence, right? So you take this raw information, you process it, and you end up with intelligence, and intelligence is actionable, meaning that when you take action, you're doing it on the basis of useful information that actually increases your chance of success in whatever tactical or strategic game you identify for yourself. But which tactical or strategic game you identify yourself depends on who your client is. And again, in this case, I'm assuming that, like myself, your client is usually yourself. In other words, you're generally a freelance person trying to understand the world and make decisions, right? So I'm not here to tell you what you should care about, what you should believe in, or what goals you should pursue. What I'm telling you is no matter what you believe in, what you care about, or what goals you should pursue, the analytic tradecraft that I just tried to explain is going to be helpful to you. However, each of us have our own habitus, and our habitus is our victory conditions or our objectives in the game that we're playing. And intelligence is very much based on game theory. So each of us is a player. We're all playing a game, but none of us are playing the same game, and none of us have the same victory condition. So I'm going to read something here. It says, being aware that one's enemies may try to confuse is a relevant factor, especially in the areas of intelligence cycle security and its subdiscipline counterintelligence. During World War II, the German word for counterintelligence was Funkspiel, or a radio game. Not a game in the sense of playing fields, but something that draws from game theory and seeks to confuse one's opponents. So I'm trying to tell you how to take information in, including the intentionally deceptive and misleading information of adversaries, and render it into something useful for your tactical and strategic advantage, even though your tactical and strategic advantage may be at variance or in direct opposition with mine, as in fact it is, right? Your ideological agenda is opposite of mine, but I'm still trying to give you techniques that will be useful for you in the pursuit of your agenda as it is useful in the pursuit of mine. But once I've identified what my aims are and who my adversaries are, that's when we switch from intelligence to counterintelligence. I've been telling you how to take signal, or rather take noise and derive it into signal. In a future episode, we'll tell you how to take noise, a signal, and direct it into noise, right? So what I choose to put forward is different than what I take in. What I take in is for the intention of understanding. What I put forward may be the intention for understanding, or maybe for the intention to deceive. That will depend on who I'm communicating to and for what purpose I'm communicating, and so on and so forth. So you will in some points wish to educate and inform other people. At other times you may wish to deceive them or misdirect them, depending on how their strategic or tactical agenda either interacts with or counteracts yours. Right? So this episode has only been about how to take operational environment intelligence, data, and render it into intelligence. Counterintelligence could be the opposite. So a person's rhetorical and ideological agenda is potentially infinite in complexity, right? There are standards like honor and integrity and so forth that make up a part of an honor code or a moral code, which are at times compatible and at times incompatible with your strategic and tactical objectives. And what your ultimate moral hierarchy is going to depend on your mission and so forth. So, in other words, that's going to take a whole other podcast to break down. But I personally actually pay a great deal of attention to what I say. And if it seems that I'm saying things or posting things carelessly or irresponsibly, I personally would suggest that I'm actually doing it in a calculated, intentional, and highly conscious way. And you may doubt or question the moral integrity of my actions, but I'm confident in them.
Yeah, this is not about that at all. This is I feel like I need to clarify now. This is more to do with practicality being an important, very important factor to play into this entire thing, and limits. So like for example, one way of deceiving someone is to muddy the water, put a lot of, facts or information. You don't know which one is true, or like, find a needle in a haystack, or another example is the Gish Gallop tactic in debates where a person, brings up a million points and there's no way to address every single one, giving the illusion of like weakness on the other side. But regardless, all of these serve one purpose, and that is to take advantage of the practical limits that people have. And thus it is like, for example, because what you're saying is like look at everything, and that is something that can only be done not on your own but by relying on others, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So imagine you're trying to explore like an island, with like 10 people. Ideally, the most optimal path would be that you don't cross the same paths. Each of you explores a different segment of it, and then you return to the same point and share something of that nature. More ideal would be that the path would whatever end at the point where you're all at the same place. Regardless, the goal would be to then trust each other and then share that information, and thus getting a larger picture, while being human and having that practical limitation of, for example, being able to explore only a tenth of the island in your lifetime, let's just say. And in your lifetime, though, by the end of it, if you do trust each other and work with each other, then you can create a full map for the next generation, or whatever. The point that I'm getting at here is that practicality is absolutely key. If we realize that most people only look at headlines, right, and kind of build kind of narratives based on cognitive biases, or other types of that's the cognitive biases. That's all I need to say, because there's many, many, many types, and confirmation bias being one of them, one of the biggest ones. But regardless, when we know that this is the case, when we know the human mind has all of these weaknesses, all of these biases, and most people don't go through that effort, right? The effect of disseminating information can be very, very negative on a large scale if it's done in a way that's not accurate, so to speak. Like, so let's say I'm going to post a news article that has a 30% accuracy rating, let's just say, and I do that. I am, in some senses, participating in the dissemination of disinformation at that point, and in the effect that it will have on a lot of the people that read it, because as I said, most people are not going to do that. Just how it is. It's like putting a potentially, like, here, It's like sharing a folder full of a million files. Some of them are really cool, some of them are really bad, but that the people in that sector, in that building, most of them don't have antiviruses, right? We just know that. We know that as a fact. If that is the case, then knowingly spreading that, I think, leads to harm. I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying as a principle.
Well, I agree. So, thought, word, and deed, right? Thought leads to words, words lead to deed, and as a cart follows a horse, so one leads to the next. Therefore, you must be morally accountable for what you think, what you speak, and what you do. And when you speak, this is not inconsequential. It's not morally inconsequential. Speech is the most powerful force that humans have. So giving the correct speech can cause a war, end a war. Giving the correct utterance can cause a death or save a life. So you must be morally accountable for whatever you speak and whatever you say. And whatever you speak and whatever you say must be in line with your moral principles and priorities. So that's why I always say I'll debate any topic you want, but I'll never debate something that counteracts my own moral principles. Right? I can debate any point you want. I can debate that a triangle has four sides, or that 1 + 1 = 3. But I can't debate anything that would contradict my moral principles. I can't argue in favor of something evil or against something good, because then I would be a devil's advocate in the literal sense, right? So I pursue my own moral agendas, and I use my intelligence and rhetorical skill to pursue those agendas in a way that I consider benevolent, meaning well-intentioned and good, as well as honorable, meaning like having an integrity, loyalty, honesty, respect, discipline, etc., courage, etc. So I may deceive people at times. I'll try not to lie. And these are two different things. And if I do deceive someone, it'll be for what I consider a benevolent purpose, and in a way that doesn't counteract integrity and honesty, which would then counteract honor. So you're right. You can't just throw words around and not be accountable for what consequence they have. On the contrary, my whole game is to be so hyper advanced in what my communicative rhetorical gestures will accomplish, that I accomplish what I intend to accomplish by making those exact rhetorical gestures. So I don't say or do things willy-nilly. It often appears that I do because I have quite a lot of fun doing it, and it's very much in the moment. However, it's all strategic. It's all for a goal, and it's all in line with my moral principles. So the difference is only that you and I share very opposite or different moral ideological positions. So when I say something, you consider it irresponsible, dangerous, or wrong, precisely because I consider it moral, responsible, and right. And we're actually at opposite rhetorical points, engaging in an adversarial ideological exchange, which is rendered non-adversarial by the rules of the server and our mutual friendship. So you and I are rhetorical adversaries. We're arguing opposite points on almost every issue. And I genuinely want my position to be taken seriously and considered correct. However, I don't in any way resent you as a legitimate adversary for making the opposite point of view, and we will stand or fall on our success, right? The better man wins, just like in a UFC fight. I want to win, you want to win. We both fight as well as we can, and the best man wins. So if your position is morally opposite to mine, right? If I think that planting trees is good and you think that cutting down trees is good, we both make the best case I can. You try and argue why we should cut down all the trees, and I'll argue why we should plant all the trees. And my goal is to convince myself, secondarily, you secondarily, the audience primarily, and myself tertiarily, but I don't want to convince myself for its own sake. So 1, yes, to convince your opponent. 2, more importantly, to convince the audience. 3, to influence society. So the Roundtable is a media program, right? We put out messaging, and I control that narrative. That's my privilege as the creator of the forum. I control the narrative. I choose to not hijack it and give other people their platform. But when I take the platform for myself, I unapologetically pursue my strategic and tactical interests. So tactics is strategy at the small scale, and strategy is tactics at the large scale. My goal is to use my assets and attributes, being intelligence, research skills, public speaking, oratory, charisma, social engineering, leadership, human systems intervention, to take advantage of the full potential of the platform to achieve my goals, which is nothing more nor less than to create utopia and to take the society that exists and make it into the society that I wish to exist. And the only asset I have is my brain and my mouth. and I use those things to achieve my goals. And I think of this intergenerationally, right? I will only be able to plant seeds, but if I plant those seeds skillfully in the right place, in the right soil, then generations after I die, things that I wish to come about may come about in the future.
I think you're bluffing.
Don't worry
You
about
think I'm
dying, dude.
bluffing?
Stick with the truth.
I'm just kidding, Shogun.
No, that's actually
All right.
very wise. That's very true. I am bluffing. And what I realized in the past is I've been able to bluff the whole planet before. I can bluff a whole planet, right? So yeah, I am bluffing. And usually it works. And if it works, then that's all that matters.
So I have a question, and it's a timely example, and it's a very broad, open-ended question, but it concerns like the whole COVID subject writ large. You know, the virus, the lockdowns, the vaccine, the protocols we all have to follow, everything like that. So in looking at it long term, you know, like the facts that were initially assumed to be true, some of them have turned out to be false, as has some of the science and many of the media messages. So, you know, just looking at it with a very broad brush, how would you approach this whole subject and get to the truth, you know, predicated on the assumption that many of the facts that we were going by initially have turned out to be false?
So, first of all, it's a wonderful question. And I actually think it would be a great podcast in and of itself. And it would have to be a podcast in and of itself, right? So everything I just laid out was like a framework, a template, a scaffold. And it would be way too long to do that question now. But what I think would be a great idea would be, now that you've heard what I just presented as a general structure of how to interpret, you're right. COVID is the perfect example, right? This is a world where Russia is lying to China, China's lying to America. They're all trying to blame each other and make themselves look good. It's a perfect example of why you need the system I just tried to introduce you to understand it. If you just go by the media, even if you look at, oh, this is a chart of the best media sources, and I only go with the creme de la creme, you know, Reuters or whatever is the best source there is. I only go by Reuters, so my information is better. You're right? Like, this is what I'm going to lay out. Like, there's 3 levels of this or more. The lowest level is, and almost nobody on this server is on this level. I don't think anybody is, right? Whatever I hear, thank you. Whatever I hear or whatever I read, I believe, right? I hear it on TV. I hear it on the internet. I believe it. Nobody hears that naive. Nobody hears that stupid. The second level is, I can tell that some sources are less credible than others, and I choose better sources, so I have better information. You have worse sources, you have worse information. That is the stage where most people feel like they're at the top of the pile, right? When in reality, they're only on stage 2. They've just taken one step towards information processing, where they don't take everything for granted and they actually apply some discrimination to what they take on board. And then they automatically think that they've figured it all out. And it's just like, I trust this source and you trust that source. My information is right. Your information is wrong. What I'm trying to get you to do is like realize that's not even close to sufficient. You need to be existing in a state of like quantum uncertainty paradox, where everything is simultaneously the truth and a lie, and you never know, and it could change at any second, no matter how much the person you're trusting could have been trustworthy at every step before this and never given you any indication that they were ever lying and only ever told you the truth, and yet all along have only been plotting your destruction and only telling you the truth to ultimately mislead you on the important lie. That's the level of skepticism you have to have. You can't trust anybody, not your wife, not your mother, not your best friend, and not yourself. So it's not just to say, oh, you trust Fox, oh, I trust NBC, or you trust BBC, I trust NPR. No, if you trust anybody, you're still an amateur hour, right? Your job is to take this all as information. Now, about COVID, I'd love to break it down and actually apply this, right, in real time, step by step, as an illustrative example. But if we did that, that would be like another 2 hours, you know, let's be honest. That's a huge fucking question. There's so many aspects to that. It has to be its own podcast, I'm sorry to say.
How about philosophically or just emotionally, like living life not trusting anyone, even someone that you're supposed to be, for example, like your spouse? to
Well,
have
so when you say you
constant
don't
doubt.
trust somebody, it doesn't mean you can't emotionally trust somebody. In fact, you have to all the time, right? That's something I do all the time in the server. I hand people the whole keys. I've handed people the keys to the server. They can delete the server. I hand people keys to all my podcasts, everything I have. You have to trust people, right? So I'll take my whole basket of eggs and say, hey, I think I can trust you to carry this basket of eggs 5 more steps, right? And then they carry it 5 more steps, and I take it back and I say, thank you for carrying this 5 more steps. I think I can trust this person to carry this 3 steps, and they carry it 3 more steps. So thank you. Take it back, right? So you have to trust people. That's an operational necessity. But you can't trust people in an absolute sense, right? So trust is like the white swan fallacy, right? Every swan you've ever seen is white, right? You'd say this person has always said trust, 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 trust. White swan, white swan, white swan. They've always done the right thing. A black swan event is a black swan event because you didn't expect it. Every swan you ever saw was white. You wouldn't expect a black swan, but black swans occur. In the same way, the person that you trusted every day for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, on year 21 could completely betray you and fuck you over. That's a fact. That doesn't mean you have to live your life in some state of emotional misery where you're misanthropic and you don't trust anybody. It means that as a matter of operational tactics, you realize that every additional level of trust you extend increases your risk. So imagine that you have a fortress, right? And the fortress is impregnable from the outside. The walls are so strong that nobody can penetrate the walls and the gates. But inside there's a self-destruct button where if anyone presses that button, as servers have, a delete button, right? So each additional person who has access to that button exponentially increases the risk that the fortress will be destroyed because more people have the ability to destroy it. You may trust each of those people explicitly and implicitly. You may trust them with your life. It doesn't change the fact that each additional person who has the key to the self-destruct room increases the risk of destruction exponentially. So you will therefore minimize that risk by minimizing the number of people who have access to that button. Even if you actually trust those people with your life, you still won't unnecessarily increase the risk to your organization posed by more people having that permission. So the people who have the ability to hurt you should be minimized, even if you trust those people. So it's not about emotional distrust. It's about tactical distrust. You never take on liabilities unnecessarily. You never open up access points to things that shouldn't be accessed unnecessarily. You never give self-destruct buttons to people unnecessarily. You may be my best friend, but you still don't have to have the ability to hurt or harm me because I don't know, right? There's always some unknown factor. You could go into psychosis. You could have something going on in your life I'm not aware of, right? So you're always going to work towards minimizing risk. And my interests are intelligence, which we've talked about today, security, which is more what you're talking about, defense, which is another term, military strategy, tactics. They all have different connotations. Today we've been talking about intelligence, which is basically about processing information in order to take less useful information, remove ambiguity, and turn it into more useful information. But security and defense and military are 3 different applications, but the things, each of those depend on good intelligence. So it all boils down to tactics and strategy. Strategy is on a larger scale. Tactics is on a smaller scale. You cannot achieve strategic victory without tactical victory, and tactical victory without strategy is futile.
I think you can be losing like a lot of things though through fear. Like you're talking about, in a sense, from what I can understand, is like identifying threats. So therefore, if you may see somebody as a higher perceived threat because maybe, you know, their intellect or like ideas or whatever, you stop being able to trust them. I completely agree with what you're saying, and I do understand it. But I'm also saying like maybe identifications of threats and having that level of fear as well can be a limiting factor to your overall success of completing your mission, right?
Right. So when you say threat, most people would associate threat with fear, right? Because in most people's world, things that they are threatened are fearful to them. That is understandable, but that's not what I'm talking about. Threat and fear are completely decoupled in this situation. There is no fear. Fear adds no strategic or tactical dimension to anything. So
Yes.
Fear is an emotional response to being put in danger, which is actually counterproductive to both tactics and strategy, right? You want to be fearless in your response to danger. So although normal people associate threat and fear, from an analyst's point of view, there is no correlation between those two things. Our goal, though, is if you're hired to say, how do I keep this organization as safe as possible, then you must analyze the structure, identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and minimize those weaknesses and vulnerabilities, period, full stop. And you can't say, oh, well, that's Sarah. I love Sarah. I trust Sarah. So I'm going to give her the key that can destroy the whole building, even though she doesn't actually need to have it. It's not because I'm afraid of her. It's just strategically and tactically impractical for her to have that key unless she absolutely needs it. So you identify who really needs the key to the self-destruct button. And if I can reduce that number from 3 to 2, I will. And then people say, well, wait, why did you take my key away? Does that mean you don't like me? Does that mean you don't love me? Does that mean I'm not as good? Those aren't the kind of thinkings we're doing. We're just trying to reduce the number of vulnerabilities from 3 to 2, and from 2 to 1, and from 1 to 0. In other words, there's no emotion involved. It is literally a chess game. It's like, am I at risk from this position? Yes. Is the person in that position trustworthy? Yes. Can I remove the risk posed by the position, even though I trust the person? Yes. So I don't trust you any less, but you still don't need to have a gun while I'm sleeping. I'll just take the gun away and I'll still sleep and I'll still trust you. But there's no risk now that you're going to shoot me while I'm sleeping. Not because I'm afraid of you, not because I don't trust you, but just because I can statistically reduce the risk from 42% to 41%. Right?
Yeah, wouldn't it be like a great idea to be able to go beyond that? And I understand what you were saying, like, people are not like dependable 100% of the time, all the time. But wouldn't it be better to be able to get people up to a certain level where you wouldn't have to, you would be able to feel that you're on an equal playing field, like an equal level with certain individuals that have demonstrated certain things?
So being able to trust and take risks is just as important as being able to mitigate risks. So sometimes you have to take risks, even what risks might people think are dramatic or extreme, right? So martial arts are an art, not a science, and martial arts is the art of war, right? So martial arts are the art of war, and in order to win wars, you have to take risks. Sometimes you have to take extraordinary risks. You have to trust people. Sometimes you have to give extraordinary trust to people. So there is no rule here, right? You want to mitigate risk as much as possible and reduce vulnerability as much as possible, but sometimes winning the war might be opening up vulnerabilities or opening up risk. So strategy and tactics is much more complicated than minimize risk. Sometimes high risk, high reward strategies work. And this is, again, like multiple other podcasts that would have to happen. This podcast was about intelligence analysis specifically. And intelligence analysis is used to have military and political advantage. So intelligence analysis, if you want to look at it as a pyramid, is the base of the pyramid. Your intelligence creates action. Your data analysis creates actionable intelligence. Your actionable intelligence is what you're going to use to execute successful tactics, and successful tactics are going to execute successful strategy. So long story short, like, this has to be part 1 of 3. We should do 1 intelligence, 2 tactics, 3 strategy. And if I can correctly do those 3 episodes, you should be able to apply it to any particular goal. But all we've talked about today is how to take an environment of high ambiguity because of people lying, being deceptive, being unclear, being mistaken, etc., and render that into a series of low ambiguity, because the less ambiguity, the more effective your actionable intelligence. Beyond that, you can use that actionable intelligence to start planning your tactic and strategy. But again, that depends on your habitus. What is your goal? What are your victory conditions? What are you trying to do? How do you accomplish it? That becomes tactics, strategy. So we can't go really deeper into that in this episode. What we can
I'm
all
just
agree
wondering
on.
if you can.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you can touch on sort of inherent biases of the information that you're analyzing, and how much sort of a weight in the analysis that should play. Granted that they may be trying to deceive you, so they may be pulling out any sorts of different information to throw you off course. So how much, granted that their inherent biases? How much of a weight in the analysis should that play?
I'm sorry, but can you just repeat the question one time?
It's just like the inherent biases of the target that you're trying to analyze, like how much that should be weighted given the information that you're trying to break down.
Did you say the target you have to analyze?
Yeah, or the source or whatever it is, the data.
Well, I'm not 100% sure what you mean. I mean, it all has to be analyzed, right? So you have to analyze first the client, right? Who is making you do what you're doing? And in most cases, that will be you yourself, right? But then you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to do and why am I trying to do it? Because that's your telos. Your teleology or your telos is what you're trying to achieve. If your telos is out of whack, even by 1 degree, then even if you were to have 100% perfect execution and tactics and strategy, but your aim was incorrect, then you successfully achieved an incorrect aim, right? Which is actually going to potentially do more harm than doing nothing at all, right? So the most important thing is knowing what you want to do. So the main thing you need to analyze is yourself, right? Do you even have the right goal? Do you even have the right objective, right? Because if you don't have the right objective and goal, right, and yet you have all the power in the world, you're only going to succeed in hurting yourself or doing irrelevant, pointless shit. So it's better to have your own focus nailed down than to have all the power and the wrong goal, right? Now, if you're talking about a target like an enemy, then of course understanding your enemy is crucially important. And you're going to want to be able to actually see that enemy as yourself. In other words, see through his eyes and feel what he feels. So if you don't have a functioning mind map or mind model of your enemy, you're not going to be able to predict how to destroy your enemy because you're not going to understand what choices he's going to make or what conditions would be detrimental to his success. So you must be sympathetic and empathetic to your enemy. You must be able to see yourself as your enemy and care about what he cares about in order to know what to destroy.
Right. So, but like the point is like I'll cite like another example, like a corporation that is putting out a commercial, right? It's assumed that they're trying to sell a product, and you can kind of go by that base assumption, right? So that's fairly obvious, but there may be far less obvious goals of whatever the data set that you're trying to analyze. Now, you may have some sort of idea of the inherent bias of the individual or the target or whatever it is, but you don't know what the goal of their information putting out is. So their inherent bias, and you have some idea of what their overall goal is, but you don't know what the goal of this particular piece of information is. So that was my question.
Okay. So let's say you know what your adversary's goal or telos is, right? So let's say their goal is to make more profits in the chocolate bar industry. If I know their telos, their motivation, I should be able to reverse engineer whatever informational communication they put out in light of what I know that their agenda is. The basis of this is that what would I do in their position, right? If my goal was X, and I was in their shoes, what would I do? Then you look at what they're doing and you should be able to tell why they did it, right? So maybe they made an advertisement that called into question the quality of the products of their main adversary, right? So let's say you're Reese's Pieces and your main competitor is Kit Kat, and you put out a commercial that says Kit Kat is made with crappy fake chocolate. It's not even real chocolate. I can understand that you probably said that to make their product look bad, to make your product look better by comparison, so that you would have a better share of that market by making your product look superior to theirs. So because I know your motivation, I can interpret the reason for your action. If I didn't know your motivation, I would have a hard time interpreting the reason for your action. But if I know your motivation, I should be able to interpret the reason for your action simply by knowing what I would do in your place. Right? So if I'm a chess player and I know that I'm trying to win chess and I know that you're trying to win chess, I don't need to question why your horse went up 2 pieces and 1 to the left, because all I need to do is say, well, if I was playing your position, what would I have done with my horse? And I'd say, oh shit, you moved your horse there because you wanted to take my rook, because that's what I would have done if I was you.
Right. But what about in the case where there's complicating unknown factors? So like let's say that the chocolate bar corporation, they actually say that their supposed rival, puts out a great product, and you're not aware that they're under the same parent company. And you could go by that assumption, but there's possibly dozens of other reasons why the company would do this. So how, and this is assuming that you're not able to get to the actual reason why they're doing it. So how would you implement a proper deductive method in order to arrive at the correct conclusion?
So again, what you need to do is make some kind of visual. Well, first of all, you need to make a cognitive representation of the landscape. And so perhaps this is where it becomes useful to go into Pierre Bourdieu's sociological theory. And I'm just going to introduce these three topics: field, habitus, and capital. So first of all, you need to create a conceptual map of the battleground, and you need to place symbolic representations on the battleground of the different agents and artifacts on the battleground. So an agent is anything that has the volitional choice to make a decision. That's called an agent. An artifact is anything that may be used by an agent but has no volitional choice of its own. So a sword is an artifact, a knight is an agent, right? Each of them is going to have a field, a habitus, and a capital. You can assume that, granted that you're fighting in a specific war zone or battleground, anybody in that battleground shares the same field. However, they're all going to have different habitus, and they're all going to have different capital. Habitus is your victory conditions, your objectives, your agenda, your goals. So Hermes' habitus is different than mine, and yours is different than his. Your victory conditions, even though you're on the same battleground, may be different than mine. Maybe yours is to secure the oil well. Maybe mine is to secure the fresh water. Maybe yours is just to demoralize my forces or to destroy my supply chains. We're all in the same board game. We don't have all the same goals. We also don't have all the same habitus. So if I have lots of tanks, that's part of my habitus. If you have lots of money, that's part of yours. If you have the loyalty of the local indigenous peasants and farmers, that's your capital. So field, that's the game we're playing on, the game board. Habitus, what are your victory conditions? What do you need to do to win based on what you understand the game to do? And I'm trying to figure out who that is. But, and capital is the resources you have available to you to achieve your goal. So what you're going to want to do is create the most accurate possible map. And the map is conceptual. But the way humans work, visual and tactile things work, which is why we keep posting this image, right? It seems funny because when you look at it, it seems like it's a joke, but this is literally how you do it, right? Get your pin-up board, your cork board, pin everything on your wall. So let's say you go to battle and there's 10 knights of the enemy and 10 knights of the friend. You would want a picture of each knight, a description of their name, their history, what they care about, who their families are, what they do. And you put that on your board and you put a pin and you say, look, that's Sir Gawain, that's Sir Galahad, that's Sir Lancelot, that's Sir Bertilac. And you put these pins with their pictures, their names, their descriptions, and then you make like strings. Like, so red strings represent alliances, or blue strings represent alliances, and red strings represent complications. So first, who are the 10 fighters on the field? Okay, these 10 knights. Put them all on the board, their pictures, their names, whatever you know about them. Okay, Bertilac is friends with Galahad. There's a blue string between these two. Oh, Lancelot hates Gawain. There's a red string between these two. Right? In other words, your ability to make tactical decisions depends on the quality of your intelligence. Your intelligence is how accurately your mental model maps to reality. And in order to make that mental model map to reality more concisely or effectively, you're going to have to create increasingly complex heuristic maps, which now we can use computers, but really it's just pen and paper. And your ability to hold multiple pieces in your mind at one time. It's literally all it is. So I can't know what you're going to do if I don't know you exist. I want to then know your name, who you care about, what your agendas are, what your ideological persuasions are, what your religious orientation is, right? Any piece of information I have about you is going to help me know if you're a friend or a foe, or whether I could turn you from a friend or a foe, or even if you're a foe, if I could manipulate you to indirectly be my friend just by turning you against someone else, right? And all that's going to depend on what I know about you. What are your motivations? Do you care about money? You might not be my friend, but I have money. You care about money? Maybe I can make you do what I want by giving you money. You may not be my friend, but you hate Joe. I hate Joe too. Maybe you hate Joe even more than me. I can feed your hatred of Joe, make you attack Joe. You're not my friend, but the friend of my friend, my enemy of my friend is my friend, right? So this is why there's no such thing as a bad source or bad information, because we're trying to create a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional tactical map, which includes motivations, incentives, resources, geographical location, temporal location, familial relationship, social context, cultural context, ideological commitment. I mean, we're talking about layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. And honestly, most people's minds are not made for this kind of thing, but that's the way it is.
Right. So, but what about in a situation where it's a given that you don't have a sufficient amount of information to, even know what the goal of the nemesis or the opposition is, and you're not able to draw sufficient associations to come to any sufficient conclusion, then what would kind of be the risk and damage minimization what do you call it, I guess goal be?
Yeah. So again, I don't know who said this, but you got your known knowns, you know what you know. You've got your known unknowns, you know what you don't know, and you've got your unknown unknowns, you don't know what you don't know. So we might say, well, we know that we have this plane, right? The F-35 is the best American fighter air superiority air-to-air combat platform is the F-35. The best air-to-air combat platform that Russia has is the Checkmate, formerly the Su-57. So those are known knowns. We know that Russia's best fighter jet is the Su-57 or the Checkmate, and we know that the Americans' best fighter is the F-22 or the F-35. We also have known unknowns, where we'd say, well, we know they have a secret program in the Arizona desert, but we don't know what they do there. So we know that that's a known unknown. We know they're doing something there, but we don't know what they're doing there. We also know there's unknown unknowns, which may, in addition to Area 51, there may be Area 52, but we don't even know that Area 52 exists. So you got your known knowns, your known unknowns, and your unknown unknowns, right? And so it becomes quite complicated. And if you don't know somebody's intentions, motivations, then you're going to need to sponsor more information. Human intelligence and signals intelligence. Human intelligence would be influencing or putting people around them or tapping the people around them for the information they have. Signals intelligence would be scooping up their phone records, their internet records, or other digital artifacts of their communication in order to discern through analysis of that more about their psychometrics. So psychometrics are how their mind works, and you can use signals intelligence to discern psychometrics. You can also use, so you got human intelligence, and if there's someone on the board and you don't know which way they swing, are they on your side or on the enemy side, or they're your enemy but you don't know their goals, it means you have an insufficiency of intelligence, which means you need more collection and better analysis. More resources, process better, to understand better, always in an infinitely complex, ever-changing confidence interval for every possible statement or claim. I mean, the truth of this is it's so mind-bogglingly complicated that nobody that we know of other than humans can do it. Humans have a bicameral, dual hemispheric, organic quantum dual supercomputer in their heads. You have 2 quantum supercomputers in your head. You're a bicameral supercomputer, and you can do potentially anything. This is what's represented by the concept of mentats and Dune, which is that humans have an ability to process information that is not actually supernatural, but from our current point of view, could be called supernatural. So this says, a set of problem-solving talents are essential for analysts. Since the other side may be hiding their intention, the analyst must be tolerant of ambiguity, of false leads, and of partial information, far more fragmentary than faces the experimental scientist. And I want to reiterate this point, and I think I want to probably close on this point. But this is really important. And I hope I can find it really quickly. Okay, I'm going to have to scroll up to find it. But this is probably the most important thing in a way. Like, it's hard to actually manifest, but it's super, super important. So I'm just going to repost this. So this is what it means to be a mentat, if you read Dune. An intelligence analyst ultimately is a mentat. And you can read above this. But it says, some analysts speak of a Zen-like state in which they allow the data to speak to them. Others may meditate or even seek insight in dreams, hoping for an insight such as that given to August Kukula in a daydream that resolved one of the fundamental structural whatever. I'm going to close probably by posting this definition of a mentat, because I think mentats from Dune represent the ideal of what an intelligence analyst is. Or what an intelligence analyst should be, which is someone who's harvesting the maximum potentiality of the human brain in order to process information. So I'm just simply going to post this definition, and I'll read it. If it pops up. So a mentat. A mentat was a profession or discipline that was developed as a replacement to the computers and thinking machines following the Butlerian Jihad that banned the creation of machines in a human mind's image. So it says, Gilbertus albans displayed the first cognitive thinking and computer-like calculation capacity necessary for an aftermath, a mentat. So anyways, you can read about this. But basically, humans are capable through observational intelligence of compiling through observation and collating more information than any computer can currently do. We're not able to articulate how we do that, but that doesn't mean we're not capable of refining that into an ever more effective art and science. So we may not be able to explain how we predict the next sword strike and block it, but we can do so. And the best one at doing so is the best sword fighter. And in Warhammer 40,000, there's a school of assassin called the Vannis. And the Vannis kill people only through the manipulation of information. They just simply manipulate information and use social engineering to assassinate their targets. I would postulate that as the most refined system of assassination. Anyways, does anyone have another question? And we probably should close up soon.
Just touching on your last point there, the role that kind of like parapsychology, like psychics and people of extraordinarily, mental or whatever other powers they have, whether it be remote viewing, whether it be mind reading, whether it be, telekinesis, things of that nature. You may have read up, the CIA experimenting with things of this nature. And this may be kind of off topic, but just kind of your thoughts on that, like what role that sort of thing plays.
It's very significant. You should research Project Stargate, research Project MK Often, research the Russian super soldier psychic spy thing, watch Men Who Stare at Goats, and understand that the potentials of the human mind, most powerful super weapon that exists. Most of the other technologies that exist are reverse engineering human concepts to try and make technological reflections of what the brain can already do. So humans are the most powerful weapon. Information warfare, social engineering, counterintelligence, intelligence. All of these are capacities of humans, which may be technically materialistic or scientific in nature, but because our abilities exceed our ability to understand our abilities, from our point of view, they are supernatural. In the future, we'll probably be able to, identify the mechanism by which they happen. But that's why we call these arts, right? Tradecraft, the art of martial arts, the art, right, of magic. These are arts, not sciences. The only strategy of combat that matters is the one that works. And if you're unable to explain why it worked, it doesn't matter. So it says, victory requires no explanation, defeat allows none, right? So if you succeed and if you win, you don't need to explain yourself. And if you lose, your explanation makes no difference. So therefore, harness the highest potentiality of your capabilities and don't be confined by your inability to explain how you know what you know. Learn how to throw a dart in the dark and hit a bullseye, because some people can do that. And if you can't do that, they will win against you.
Interesting you say that.
You can throw it. Let me tell you this. You can throw a dart in a dark barn with a blindfold on and hit a bullseye. And as long as you don't understand that that's within the realm of human capability, you'll never manifest it. But there are people out there, and there have been people out there for thousands of years who knew how to throw a dart in a dark room with a blindfold on and hit a bullseye. And that's the kind of people that could be your adversaries or could be your friends. But the important thing is, can you be one of those people? The answer is yes, you can, actually. So I think we got to close it there because I got to work tomorrow. But I really appreciate you guys listening and bearing with me as I tried to say this, and your questions and comments. And we'll probably make this a trilogy. We'll do intelligence, tactics, strategy. So today was the intelligence episode. We'll do tactics next. We'll do strategy next. And in principle, that would be pretty useful. If I could just close by recommending 2 books. I would recommend Miyamoto Musashi, The Book of Five Rings, as a book of tactics, and Sun Tzu, The Art of War, as a book of strategy. And hopefully you enjoyed this and it was helpful. Again, this is about epistemology. It's about how we know what we know. And I would argue that intelligence is the only form of epistemology that will be useful in the bigger picture of sociology. Because unlike chemistry, physics, pure logic, computer science, or mathematics, you're dealing not with numbers and quantities and chemicals, but with conscious agents who make decisions to deceive and mislead. So you need a theory of mind. In chemistry, you don't need a theory of mind. In mathematics, you don't need a theory of mind. Even in pure logic, you won't have a fully articulated theory of mind. Only in intelligence do you accept that you're trying to discern the truth in a world of infinite lies, deception, mind games. So formal logic will fail you here. Mathematics will fail you here. Computer science will fail you here. If you're not capable of thinking in what we might think of as spiritual ways, you'll just simply be outmaneuvered by the confusing nature of human beings. And those are ultimately both your adversaries and your friends. You know, humans, for better or worse, are the big players here. And humans are not fully logical. They're not fully rational. They don't follow logical laws. You need to be able to deal with their capacity for insanity, irrationality, randomness, craziness, weakness. Much, much more complicated than, you know, formal logic, mathematics, or anything else. We're dealing with human nature. And that's the most interesting thing that exists. That being said, please join us on the Roundtable Discord server. We record this podcast every day at 9 p.m. Central. Check out RT Podcast for past events. Check out Announcements channel for upcoming events. Thank you to Rafi for recording. Thank you all for attending. Let's join the Roundtable channel upstairs. Puddles, I guess.